Hi, I'm Jerry Bowyer. This is the Eagle Investing Network. Thank you so much for watching. But don't just watch, subscribe so that you get notices so you don't have to miss any of these free and informative videos. Also, don't be stingy. Share with somebody else who wants to understand finance, financial economics, macroeconomics, and investing, and how those things relate to one another. A lot of people are concerned about the national debt in the United States. During most of my career, I haven't been concerned about it. I was the guy that the media went to, even the 80s and 90s, to say, I know that people think there's about to be a debt collapse, and some talk radio hosts and various newsletter writers were saying there's about to be hyperinflation, the dollar's going to collapse. By Monday, you'll have to go into the dumpster to get food. And none of that was true because those people weren't really paying attention to the data. They were selling fear. So I would be the person that the TV networks, CNBC or old CNN FN or Fox Business News or even PBS would go to say, do we really need to worry about the debt right now? And I'd look at the data and say, not really. Maybe eventually, but not now. Okay, eventually has come. And now we need to be concerned about it. So let's take a look at debt. This is debt to GDP ratio. I know my friend, Dr. Mark Skousen, also of Eagle Investing, would say gross output is more important, and he's right. I don't have the gross out. There's not a debt to gross output data set produced yet by the government. They'll have to catch up. Maybe we can produce our own. But for now, we'll do debt to GDP ratio. Gross output is the entire economy. GDP is more focused on end purchases. When you buy stuff, that's in GDP. When you buy a car, that's GDP. When the auto company builds a car or the mining company mines bauxite or iron ore, that's not in GDP. But this is a good stand-in for economic output. Back in 1968, our debt to GDP ratio was about 40%. Imagine a family that makes $100,000 a year and is $40,000 in debt. Emergency? No, not really. So let's let the history unfold and tell its story. And we see this going on, 1970s. Debt to GDP ratio, not all that bad. We were debasing, but we weren't debt. Now we have some increase with Reagan, but even then, it's 40 and 50%. So people were terrified of the Reagan debts. Not really something to be concerned about. At 40 to 50%, a family that makes $100,000 a year and is $50,000 or $40,000 in debt is not in crisis. But boom, what happens? We go on an incredible spending spree, stimulus programs that don't really do much of anything except increase the national debt. So this is debt growth for stimulus programs. And of course, whenever you have a deep recession, tax revenues fall, but spending doesn't fall. It goes up. Revenues go down and spending goes up. We don't tighten our belt as a government when things are tough. As individual consumers, we tighten our belt when things are tough, but they don't tighten their belt in Washington. And the combination of low tax revenues from really a depression and a whole bunch of stimulus spending, which becomes a new normal, means that we have this enormous jump upward in debt to GDP ratio. And around here, a lot of people were talking in talk radio and other places about how you have to buy gold. It's the only thing that will have any value. Stock market will go to zero. Dollar will go to zero. Not really. At 100% debt to GDP ratio, it's a concern area, but plenty of countries have been at 100% debt to GDP ratio for a decade or more. And they're not the United States, which is the leader of the world. And then we have the COVID crisis where we shut the economy down and then pump money into the economy to make us all feel better, and then we have this huge increase. By the way, President Biden made a recent comment about our deficit being the biggest drop in American history. Well, maybe in dollar terms, but we can see here that the slight decreases, I mean, something like this, you know, when you look at the size of the overall debt, you know, a little tiny blip down at the end doesn't really amount to very good news. And the forecasts are for this to continue to grow. And we're going to see that in a future video. We'll look at even the Congressional Budget Office, run by the government, is admitting that this is going to be a problem. So now, depending on how you calculate it, there's different ways to calculate debt, you know, that the government owes to the general public versus government owes to itself because the Social Security system has bonds in it. So there's lending back and forth between the Social Security Agency and the federal government, and there's lending back and forth between the Fed and the central government. So there's different ways to calculate this, but however you calculate it, it is very historically high, and that's a concern. And one of the things that makes it an even bigger concern, and we'll talk about this in a future video, is that interest rates are very low right now. So that's kind of like now this is like a family that makes $100,000 a year but has $130,000 in debt. Oh, and looking at the demographics, is about to retire. Oh, and they've got an adjustable rate mortgage, and the mortgage rate is about to go up. So there's a lot of things that make us very vulnerable to this high debt level. Do I think you'll be diving in the dumpster for food by Monday? No, but I would say some sort of debt crisis is now a non-trivial risk. It's on the radar screen. It is within sight, and it's something to be taken account of in terms of your investment decisions. Now, I've been issuing warnings for years about people who are highly invested in treasury bonds, which is government debt. And the problem is some financial advisors who don't really pay attention to some of the details, we're just automatically putting older people into treasury bonds because that's the old formula, the 60-40 rule, 60% in bonds and 40% in stocks. And that was not taking account of the fact that bonds were very, very low yields. They were severely overvalued. And that's why this year, in 2022, we've actually seen a tremendous amount of pain in the bond sector. And that's poor planning on the part of advisors who put people in huge amounts of treasury. Now, if we had a real debt crisis, treasury bonds would really spike, which would be very destructive. This is now in the zone where investors need to start paying attention to it. So after a lifetime of saying, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry, now I'm saying it's time to be concerned. One way I like to put it is national debt does not matter right up until the moment when it's the only thing that matters. And I fear that we are getting closer to that moment. I'm Jerry Bowyer. This is the Eagle Investing Network. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. And thanks for subscribing if you have. And if you haven't, I'll thank you in advance for subscribing right after this video stops, which is right now.